Zero optimism. Yeah, it's been a long meeting. Hello. Calling to order this public hearing by the Parowan City Planning and Zoning Commission to receive public comment regarding conditional use permit for a gazebo at 435 West, 200 North. And secondly, for comments on amendments to Parowan City Municipal Code 15.50.010 and 15.60.030D. And those particular codes refer to home occupancy permits and the signage allowed. So at this point, I'll accept public comment with regard to conditional use permits for a gazebo at 435 West, 200 North. As you come up, please state your name. Okay. And
I just don't see a problem with it. I mean, it's very well built. It's built by a contractor. It's not something you order from Costco or Sam's Club. It's a very, very nice gazebo. If I have to, I'll tear down a storage shed, just to make sure I got enough room, but I don't see a problem with it.
okay, thank you. And we'll discuss that at length when we move from the public hearing into the public meeting. And we may call you up again to answer some questions and so on.
Considering that you look around the town, look at the backyards, and there's people with less than 10% backyards. So,
Well, I understand that. There's reasons for that. We'll discuss it at length in the public meeting, part of that. Past sins don't necessarily set us right going forward. David?
but we just didn't see, when we started this process, it's a gazebo. We didn't think it's not attached to the house or anything, and the neighbors thinks it's great the way we're doing it. You know, a gazebo's a gazebo. We just didn't think there was an issue with it.
Well, it's considered a structure, and in that regard,
But it's not enclosed. So,
yeah, I don't think that's necessarily important.
okay. All right.
It works.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It was on, just remember to speak into it loudly, or we have to push up the gain on the board.
Okay, any other comments regarding the gazebo? Okay, at this point, we'll close the public hearing for the conditional use permit for the gazebo. And we'll move on and we'll accept comments now for amendments to Parowan City Municipal Code 1550.010 and 1560.030D. And effectively, the changes proposed are to revise the size of the sign for a home occupation from 1 foot by 1, well, I'm sorry, it was a conflicting code. So it was hard to reconcile, and we would have to default to the more lenient code, which is what we are now proposing, which is maximum size 3 foot wide by 4 foot tall for the signboard, and the maximum height of the sign in feet of 5 feet. And we will be deleting the text for the 1 foot by 2 foot signage. Any comments regarding the signs?
I make a motion, we close the public hearing.
A what? Second?
Second.
All in favor of closing the public hearing
Aye.
and opening the regular planning and zoning meeting?
Do we need another motion for that?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Good, okay. All right, so we'll go back to the gazebo.
Do we need to declare any conflicts?
Oh, thank you. Does anybody need to declare any conflicts?
I am, a member of the,
Little Salt Lake Service
Little
Club.
Salt Lake Service Club along with Floyd McWilliams.
Okay,
And, Jerry and I are doing the same thing. Jerry's also a member.
Okay.
And just for, so that the public knows, we have that relationship with him. But
It
do
shan't
not
affect
consider
my
it a-
vote.
do not consider it a
Conflict.
conflict that would prevent us from, talking about the gazebo or, voting on it.
okay. Thank you. Okay, a couple things to get me caught up from the last meeting. One is a question for Keith or Dan. Do we customarily require a permit for every accessory building?
Depends on the square footage. Feel free to come up with Keith. If it's over 200 square feet, then it requires a building permit. That's the rule of thumb on sheds and accessory building unit, accessory buildings.
Okay, so, just a question, can you cite code to support that?
Our code says that anything that's attached to the ground requires a building permit.
Yeah.
Or is
Yeah,
a permit.
that's been a rule of thumb which has been followed forever. It is not in code.
Okay, that's what I
There
was
needs to
wondering.
be some sort of a line in the sand on where you apply it, and that's where that line has been drawn, but it is not in code.
Okay, we might wanna consider putting something into code.
Agreed.
And just to confirm, his shed, or that gazebo is just under 200 square feet.
Right, so that's my concern. It's under 200 square feet, and so I look at that and I go, so why are we requiring a conditional use permit? I understand how we got there. My understanding is after a fashion, looking into some other things on that property, we arrived at the conclusion that installing that, gazebo would exceed the 25% rule. I also think that, I'm not sure if that's, I guess that's for legal to tell us, is that just cause to go in and require a permit for a gazebo that would normally not require a permit?
I'll defer to the city manager because he deals with them, and I'm not aware of the historical precedent. The legal precedence would be that if it doesn't meet the minimum requirement, that there's no need, but, he's the one that has to deal with these issues day in and day out, and so I will defer to your wisdom, sir.
So I guess the issue is, there is a requirement that no more than 25% of the yard be buildings. I don't know why that came up. I don't know if it has to do with fire mitigation, that you have just solid buildings, you have a runaway fire through a city. I have no idea where it came from. I just know that it exists. And it says exceptions to this can be done through conditional use permit by the planning commission.
Dan, I have a
Which we
question.
talked about last time. So it says, this is 15.8.100. No accessory building or group of accessory buildings in any residential zone shall cover more than 25% of the rear yard. Exceptions to this requirement may be granted by conditional use permit. So it's not something that is in R1 as a conditional use, it just talks about the rear yard not being over 25% unless a conditional use permit is granted. So therefore, the path forward is to have this discussion. You could fill up a backyard with 100-foot accessory buildings if you didn't have this in there as a check. So personally, I think that this was written in here to give the Planning Commission wiggle room when there's common sense reasons. If there was a reason not to, then they could say, no, technically you're stepping over that. That's how we got here.
Mr. Chairman, point of information.
Yes, Dave?
When they determined the 25% of this, did they do that taking into consideration the survey, or is it the existing fence that's there?
It just says 25% of the rear yard.
I know, but
It doesn't talk about the,
in this instance, there's a difference.
oh,
There's a discrepancy between where the fence is and the survey.
It's property line.
So he has more area based on the survey than the fence line.
I see. Is it material? Does it change the?
3 foot or the width of the?
Well, I don't know, that's why I'm asking, does that take in consideration, make the 25%?
I don't know the difference between where the fence is and the property line.
You did calculate the percentage based on fence?
Yeah, based on measurements I took in the backyard.
So you're saying, is it a side yard, the side fence?
No, I'm
A
just
back
saying,
fence.
is there more area there based on the...
Right, I'm saying the fence that you're talking about isn't on the survey. Is it a backyard fence?
That's what I understood.
Because that would be, whatever it is, 3 feet by the
Yeah.
width of the entire backyard. You're talking a fair amount of square footage
Mhm.
that could change this, that's my point.
Yeah.
As a property owner, would you like to speak to that?
And if you could talk into the microphone,
Yeah.
just so it's
Yeah.
on the recording.
You're being recorded. Speak loudly.
Being recorded, cover it up.
You're live.
When I bought the house, I was told that the, fence was in fact 3 feet in. And, I questioned the people that's behind me, and there is a building, if that is in fact the truth, they've got a building sitting right up against my fence.
Oh, my.
And so, that's another can of worms if that is in fact. Plus, there's a tree right in the fence line, and half the trees on my side and half the trees on back of there. And we went through a battle about me trimming a tree when I had a shed built, 'cause she didn't want that tree cut down because of her building, but, that's just what I was told when I bought it through the real estate. And, I had my front yard surveyed for the property line, 'cause I was unsure where that was at. I'm trying to follow all the procedures that you guys are asking, and my question is too, where do you consider the backyard, the back of the house or the front?
It's the back of the house, it's a line drawn parallel.
What about
back
if
of
there's
the
a
house.
fence at the front of the house, separating the front yard to the backyard?
No,
We would
your-
call that
your
the
fence
side
is-
yard.
Yeah, that would be the side yard.
Okay.
The backyard starts at the corner.
Well,
of
my
the-
degree is in architectural drafting and design, so I know what you're talking about. So
Okay.
that was just my question.
Yes.
But I'm from Arizona. The rules are different in Arizona than they are here.
I'm shocked.
That's why I'm confused and, about all this, and that's why I'm confused about the problem with a gazebo.
Well, so, and the reason why I read the actual code, we don't know why it's there. I was postulating it may be because of you get buildings too dense, that it could be a fire mitigation problem. Other than that, is there a reason why we necessarily care?
Well,
If we have the setbacks, we have utility easements preserved. I mean, what is there, clearly there was wiggle room, maybe wiggle room is the wrong term. There was a method to have some leniency on this, written right into this section of code.
right, and I'm not contesting the issue of leniency.
I'm just trying to figure out what
And I really,
principles we're dealing with.
really don't wanna discuss,
Like I say, I'm just
Getting-
trying to improve the value of my house, trying to have a spot where the family can enjoy the evenings and barbecues and stuff like this, and, again, I'm gonna play dumb, I didn't know there would be a problem with the gazebo.
and I understand that, that doesn't really fix it, which is why we're
Right.
here, but we're here to try and fix it, so
Yeah.
don't get discouraged yet. We've got some
Yeah.
things to talk through, some
Well,
baggage to handle.
This thing is standing there and I need to get it done, get it stained, and I'm afraid to do anything to it, 'cause I'm waiting to hear
I
from you guys,
understand.
so, and the contract
So, yeah,
is
excuse
waiting to
me.
hear
So,
from me too.
right. So Dan, to your point, I don't think we're here to debate why we have the code. We're really here to discuss the application of that code.
No, and I'm not saying debate it, I'm saying maybe that will help us understand how to figure out the application. What purpose does it serve, you know?
So I did a little bit of research, and you're on the right track, so to speak, it's a fire hazard kind of a thing, it's a utilities thing. You can go on and on, it's a character of the communities sort of thing, it's a water drainage sort of a thing. If you fill up your whole backyard with concrete, now you've got a runoff problem that can impact your neighbors, and with more research, we can probably come up with 20 or 30 other reasons. Now, whether we support all those reasons or think they're necessary would be a discussion to have sometime, but maybe not now. And what I recommend now, so I'm gonna apologize in advance, I spent a day making notes about this meeting, and one of the things that I discovered in our code, but I don't recall the number at the moment. There is a piece of code that says accessory buildings it says permitted accessory buildings. And it implies that accessory buildings, doesn't say what size or anything, require a permit. Now, there's reasons for requiring a permit. So a permit sends somebody onto property to review everything to make sure we're not building in easements, not building within setbacks, that we're not breaking the 25% rule, and so on and so on. A building inspector looks to see if something is being constructed in accordance with standard building codes and that sort of a thing. So that's where we end up. So that said, moving forward, what we need to discuss here tonight, there's a request on the table for a conditional use permit to allow this resident and this property to exceed the 25% rule in their backyard.
But are they exceeding that 25%?
Well, I would suggest that short of having a survey done, we don't know.
There is a survey, but it's just the fence discrepancy.
Right, well, we have an option. We can table this, and we can have go get measurements and go from the front corner to the back and see what the measurements are and see if the fence is in place. But we're gonna have a neighbor that's gonna contest the placement or the property line because they have a shed built up against it. What is how much is the rule exceeded? Do we know? How many square feet?
He's over 25%. The entire thing is over the 25%. He's over the 25% because of the shop that he built, the Connex box.
Will you please speak into the microphone?
So he's already over the 25% before the gazebo. With the existing shop that he built, the existing accessory shed that's there, and the Connex box that's there, puts him at, I think he was closer to 30%,
Based on the fence.
based on the fence measurements.
So that's not accurate.
I don't have a way of getting accurate.
But, if he tears down the shed or whatever building he's talked about tearing down, that doesn't get him within the 25%?
No, he's still over. So,
Okay.
I'm on Dave's side of this one. I think we need to get
still
the
over
exact
based
size
on
of the
current
lot.
measurements.
I think we need to measure the lot or use the,
Yeah.
you know, to then again crunch those numbers to get some solid numbers. I mean, yes, it's over 25%, but we know that the lot is bigger than what the fence dictates.
Just to be clear, it is a lovely gazebo, and I'm all for it.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to fight it. I'm just trying to,
No, I understand,
the code.
as am I. I mean, I like the idea, but what's good for the goose is not good for the gander. We're gonna open up the doors and let everybody come willy-nilly, build whatever the hell they want?
absolutely.
Pardon my French.
Well, let me suggest something here while we're here. The path we're on is gonna potentially force the applicant to have a survey done at some expense.
You
What if-
don't have a survey.
No, just had to survey the front property line
And
for my 25-foot setback for my stairs that I...
they didn't do the entire thing.
Wait a minute. When you pay property tax, that's surveyed, right? And it shows you the size of the lot and gives you dimensions. Should.
But it may also contain the measurement, or the full area with the side yard too.
But it's gonna be in meets and bounds, and it's not gonna describe where the home is. We won't have an accurate rear yard
Yeah.
based on the legal description.
It does
Okay.
depend on when the legal was drafted. It could be,
Right.
yeah, meets and bounds versus.
I mean, you're right. The deed actually is the governing rule of what this, how this subdivision is drawn, but it's gonna start at one corner, and it's gonna work its way around.
Right.
We don't really know how that tells us what the rear yard is for square footage
That
calculation.
makes
Right.
sense.
So they would have to locate a pin
Yeah.
in the corners and say, okay, here's the corners,
Yeah.
and then they'd measure from the corners to the fence and the length of the fence.
And as an
that would be-
FYI, I pin all four of mine, and I know exactly where my property lines are, because we had that same instance with the tree and all that other stuff. Here's the rule. There's the pin, you do the math. You know, I've been in your shoes. But I know that is available, and once you locate that and pin it, then his job is gonna be simple, right, here's your house, so there you go.
I really don't think the neighbor's gonna allow anybody in their backyard. She's a strange one.
I'll go.
But if it belongs to you,
I've got a 357, I'll go.
I have a question for the city attorney. Is Utah an adverse possession state?
Scott?
Can you say that again? It didn't come
I
out
would-
of the mic.
A question for the city attorney, is Utah, an adverse possession state?
Yes.
Do you know
Open
the
and
number of
notorious,
years?
good faith claim of right, paid taxes, it's a little more strict than others, but yes, it pretty much adopts the common law definition.
Is it self-actuating, or does there need to be a judicial process?
It has to be a judicial process. And I haven't seen one in the 200 years I've been practicing law.
Are you checking something, Dan?
No, Weston was asking me a question about, similar to what you're talking about, but with fence lines, if they've been there long enough, then do they, become the de facto,
Property line.
boundaries, yeah, property
Interesting.
line.
So the answer, as I understood it, was yes, they could, but not without a court action.
Not without court action, but if you're talking about a fence line, that's a different question. And Utah is most definitely a state that recognizes, the boundary by an existing fence that's been in place. I mean, the entire Highway 89 Circleville, for example, is 20 feet off in every direction. So if you, every year, someone will move into town, they'll have their home surveyed, they will rush with anticipation and a grin up to the city offices and then to the county offices to say, I'm claiming 20 more feet of my neighbor's yard, and some of them have started to build fences, which would then push the Joneses right into the middle of 100 South, and the Smiths into the middle of the Robertson's yard, and so that's been litigated in Utah a lot, and the fence line is the fence line. Is the property line.
All right, gentlemen and ladies. We've opened a can of worms. What direction do you want to go now?
I think the survey avenue makes it even worse.
Well, that's my opinion.
What was that?
Well, we didn't hear it.
Well, I think we're placing an undue hardship on this applicant if we're gonna force them to do a survey. To what end? I mean, so what are we gonna gain by that?
Right.
If it boils down to the property line is the fence, no matter how it works out, because we've got a neighbor that's adverse to all that, then we haven't gained anything. And we still have a gentleman waiting for us to make a ruling on a conditional use permit. And my recommendation is that we go down that path and make arguments for or against a conditional use permit.
Just one ancillary issue. In the last meeting, there was talk about whether the property owner needed to put his Connex box in compliance before he seeks this, conditional use permit. And I think the position I come to is that when we approve this conditional use permit, we indicate that this doesn't have any bearing, that we are not making a statement as to whether he needs to come in compliance or not with the Connex box, but that would be left up to city administration, whether they would
Required.
Yes.
Yeah. And didn't we just, if my memory serves me properly, that Connex box has been in there for a zillion years, long before the ordinance went into effect, correct?
No.
No.
She has
It's
owned
been in the
Connex
city.
for 60
Oh, you moved it.
And when we got married last year, we just picked it up, and moved it 3 blocks north.
Oh,
And, the last meeting, we discussed it maybe, or you guys did, about maybe wrapping it with siding. And as I mentioned, as soon as I heal from my hip, which now I find out they're gonna have to do a knee replacement. As soon as in between, I am gonna start wrapping that Connex, just like the board mentioned. Then I'll paint it to match everything else.
come into compliance with the rules, in other words? Okay. All right.
Please come up to the microphone.
You're being recorded.
What do you want it to look like when we get it finished? It looks exactly like the shed, the garage that we built there. The same color, the same texture. One wall can be seen, and that's only if you're standing right in my backyard. Nobody can see it any place, unless you're flying above it, maybe, but
It's painted and trimmed. I painted the color of the shed, then the outside edges and all the trim, I painted to match what the shop is painted, so it's a two-tone color right now.
Our code is not very explicit. It simply says that the Connex needs to be, sided and painted.
well, it's painted already. We,
Well, you're gonna have to pay,
I'm serious.
right, you're gonna paint, you'll need to paint the siding.
Can I, we can explain siding, can I put plywood up?
Yeah.
It doesn't, we're not gonna specify the architectural detail.
There's a lot of Connex boxes in town that are not sided,
Yeah.
Dave, you know the rules.
but also.
They're grandfathered in.
This is not all of them.
Well, then that's a different issue, but this issue is before us right now.
Then city enforcement needs to go out and take care of that, David. After whatever when that was several many years ago.
Or this ordinance needs to be addressed.
Well,
Not again.
if we would like the Connex box ordinance to be addressed, my recommendation is bring it up to city council and see if they have the desire to readdress that. And if they do, planning and zoning will go to work and we will modify and come up with a recommended revisions to the Connex code. But until then, again, this body is limited to what the code says.
I will cite it as soon as I'm able to start doing stuff, I will. I was at Home Depot today looking at prices and different materials, and I don't have a problem wrapping it. And I don't have a problem even putting a false roof over the top of it. I don't have a problem doing that, but I just gotta get healed first.
You don't have to do that.
I don't, yeah.
You don't have to do a roof.
Yeah, I don't believe the code says it needs to be sided or roofed. Well, it says it needs to be sided, I'm sorry, but it doesn't say that it needs to be roofed.
It look decent, so I will put a temporary, not a temporary, but I will put a roof over it.
You
Thank
can
you.
even build a shed around that too.
My choice, that's not that's my choice.
Right. Okay, so as we move forward as to whether or not to grant a conditional use permit for this case, is there any discussion as to potential mitigations that need to be placed with this conditional use?
No, okay. I've answered my own question. I mean, the crux of the biscuit here is this 25% rule. And the
Right.
conditional use permit will usurp that.
Exactly.
Right. Is it gonna open up a can of worms for the next person who wants to not deal with the 25% routine? I mean, it just.
Well, it does, but again, the 25% rule can be mitigated with a conditional use permit, and a conditional use permit allows us to mitigate what we perceive as problems with the property, each individual property.
Each individual property,
Right.
okay.
So it's not like it's open the doors and,
I think that would be a case by case.
exactly.
Exactly.
I'm okay with a cup then.
Nice.
Any other comments? Any mitigations? Anybody see any challenges with this?
If, we permit, how does the conditional use work? Is it just does it stick to just the gazebo? Or does this open them up that they can have whatever they want over 25%?
Just a gazebo.
No, I'm talking about,
The conditional use permit would permit the gazebo, what's being applied for.
Right.
One suggestion is back to what I was talking about with the principles behind this, if the principles behind this is related primarily to fire concern, then how does the rest of this look? From what I can see on the satellite image, most of these are around the outside with a green lawn, open space in the middle. You know, is that, I mean, if this was a backyard that was clear full of overgrowth and weeds, then it may be a different discussion. That looks like this is very well maintained. In green lawn, I would think that would be a mitigating factor, right? If you had somebody else come in and ask they wanted 50% of it, and it was full of, you know, weeds and old lumber and all of these other things that were a high fire hazard, then that could be a potential mitigating factor. But it looks like his yard is very well kept, and just some food for thought.
So I have a couple questions about the gazebo itself. Will it have a fire pit?
No,
Will it have electrical?
no.
Thank you.
Only run a cord to it so we can have a light in there,
Well, that probably works.
you know?
And Keith, will you be issuing a building permit for the gazebo?
Because it's under the size restrictions,
Should set you up with a wireless headset, okay?
So it is kind of a conflict. I understand the county's not gonna toil and make him get a building permit for it. So what would probably do is just administratively sign off on the pre-build packet for the city, so that at least there's documentation that it's been reviewed, and submit that to him for the green light to go ahead and finish it.
Okay, great. All right, I would entertain a motion at this point.
I make a motion that we grant a conditional use permit for a gazebo at 435 West, 200 North in Parowan.
I second.
All right, before we vote, is there any other discussion? Okay, all in favor of the conditional use permit for the gazebo at 435 West, 200 North?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you.
You have to invite us for a meal over there now.
Jerry, you're gonna get us in trouble.
That properties had to be kept clean, and if they were not, the city went in and did it, and the landowners, you know, come and drive 3 blocks around our house, as in a lot of other places.
I'm gonna defer that answer to the city manager.
You know, it's crazy. If you want, problems with fires, et cetera, we have, our house was engulfed but one house, you know? So I don't know if that is still on the record. I know it used to be.
Ben?
We're aware of a few issues. We have been, it's a tricky issue, and I've talked with the city council at length about this. How heavy-handed do we want to be? Do we want to go really, really heavy-handed government with code enforcement? We can. It has to be funded. I don't want to go into any specific. It's not on the agenda, but there are some that there's cries I hear all the time. Go in there and clean that up. The person is, the one that I'm thinking of, I'm not going to say, is indigent pretty much. The city is going to spend a lot of money to go in and clean up a property. We're going to then lien the house and then kick out an individual and sell the house to get money back. That's pretty stiff. Is that, we can put notices, and we've been on a complaint driven. If there's multiple complaints on a nuisance basis, then we'll look into it. We do actually do those, and we do have cleanups that do happen. There are some yards that some people would say is a nuisance, and other people would say that's the way that's looked for 30 years. That's Parowan, and other people say that's not what Parowan is, and it's kind of a tricky issue, slippery slope. And I basically said to the city council, if you define how heavy-handed you want to be, and then we got to fund it. So Keith, he runs our courts. He is my assistant. He does some with code enforcement, and our police department does things with code enforcement. We're gonna have a dedicated code enforcement officer. So this is like, there's a lot of things we're dealing with in this town right now, but this is this slow burning issue that I think is only going to become slightly hotter and slightly hotter, and we need to define, as starting from the city council down, what we want to do. And at this point, it's been complaint driven, and we have issued citations, but we haven't gotten to the point we've actually gone in and cleaned up anybody's house yet.
And the short answer to that is yes, we do have nuisance code on the books.
Hey, thank you, appreciate it.
Well, the next item on our agenda will be the discussion about the, amendments to Parowan City Municipal Code, 1550.010 and 1560.030D. That again is the home occupation signage.
Larry,
Yes.
can I, is this gentleman here for the Connex box? Since he was added, is there any way we can make a motion to move it up so?
Well, as I look at the agenda, it's probably too late to do that.
Okay.
Let's just move with this. I think it'll be quick, and the minutes should be quick, and then we'll
Okay.
jump right into that. But thanks for that consideration. All right, is there any discussion, anybody for or opposed to the home occupation signage as written in the amendment? This
Bill?
is fully discussed and is now in ordinance form, so I'm thinking it was approved last time and we're now just ready to say yea or nay for a recommendation to city council.
You have a copy of that, is there an extra one?
Yeah, as I recall, I think that we all,
Did they pass?
You want to use that?
I just wanna look.
I can print it, I can print it and run and grab it.
Well, I've got a copy. Does somebody need to look at it?
Dave was,
Yeah,
Dave,
right
Dave,
here.
I'd let him mind.
Anybody else? Judy has another copy right here.
I couldn't read it, it was upside down on my,
Dave, I gotta teach you how to flip it. There's a button. I'll teach you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate.
It happens all the time with
I know
PDFs.
people think I'm dumb, but you know what?
I don't think you're dumb. It took me a while to learn how to flip a document on PDF.
I tried standing on my head once, but it
Yeah.
didn't work.
Dave, I think the code is highlighted on that one.
Yes.
Questions, comments? All right, at this point, I would entertain a motion with regard to the home occupancy signage.
I make a motion that we recommend to the city council the amendments to City Municipal Code 15.50.010 and 15.60.030
D.
Ren D to, well, that's the end of my motion.
Do I have a second?
I just, he didn't say a positive or a negative, does that make a difference?
You should recommend it to city council.
A favorable recommendation.
There, you know, it's just something positive.
You okay with that
Yeah,
modification?
I'm okay
to
with
you?
that. Make that my motion.
All right, so we have on the table a favorable recommendation to city council for the modifications to the city, home occupation sign code.
I'll second it.
Any further discussion on this item? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you. Next item are the minutes from, June 5th, 2024. Any comments, changes to the minutes?
I found nothing.
I trust Jerry.
So I read through these, I kinda listened to this as best as I could from home. And, as I went through the minutes, I found one minor change, and I'm not gonna be able to describe where it is. But I can probably find it here in a second. Well, I'm gonna word it this way. So Judy, as I was reading about EADU code, EADU was an acronym, and I found a spot in that discussion where EADU was not presented as an acronym. If you don't see that as you look through those, I'm willing to abandon that comment. Oh, here it is. So on page 8,
8,
second paragraph or sentence, it's a paragraph.
Jamie Bonnet,
Jamie Bonet made a motion to approve that EADUs. It just needs to be changed to caps for an acronym.
Okay.
oh.
Any other comments from anybody?
This is on page 4, the middle paragraph that starts Troy said. The last line of that paragraph says that Jones and DeMille made good assumptions and has property expertise, and I believe I said proper expertise.
Show me where, Troy? Which paragraph?
That Jones
Oh,
and DeMille has property expertise.
Any others, Troy?
No.
Anybody else?
P.
Okay, I would entertain a motion with regard to the minutes of the last meeting.
I make a motion that we approve the minutes from June 5th, 2024,
With the changes, right?
with the changes discussed.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Minutes are approved with changes. Thank you. Okay, we are now down to the permanent placement of a Connex box for Seth Fotheringham at 122 West, 300 North.
How are you doing?
Good, thank you.
So currently on my property, there are two really old sheds that are not safe, and so my wife and I are just trying to brainstorm some ideas of how to,
Future
get
musician.
get new, storage available on our property so that we can tear those down and make it a little bit more safe and clean.
How do we spell that last comment?
Well, that,
How do we spell that last comment?
Hey!
anyway, I don't know if you guys have any questions or anything for me.
Well, I'm looking at the application. Do you want to walk us through the pictures?
So I had the area in my backyard, it's kind of the back corner, I had, a little bit of dirt brought in and compacted.
Okay.
So the site's clean and clear.
Oh, there we go, color, that's good.
And then I submitted some pictures of the actual Connex box that I have, it's free of graffiti, it was a one-time use container,
20 foot.
so it's clean, 20-foot container, yep.
Okay, so, requirement-wise, we grant the permission, if you will, for the, Connex box. The requirement, as you probably already heard, is that it be sided and painted.
And you're gonna remove the other two structures, is that what I heard?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, so one of them actually sits on the property line between me and my neighbor, and, we're both debating a fence, and so we just are gonna have it torn down, and then the other one is just not safe, insurance wouldn't insure it at all. So I just wanna get something better that we can have insured and safer for my kids when they're playing around the yard.
Keith, have you processed this application, I presume? You see any issues with it? at the microphone, please? We're just trying to get you to
I'll
sit
set you
closer
up
to
next
that.
week with something you can just sit, okay?
Promise I'll lose weight eventually. Yeah, there's no problems. It's currently sitting at the Painted Hills RV Park, so it will be better situated on his property.
Okay. Oh, I know where this is. So everything's in order permit-wise? We're just going through the formal application process and permission from planning and zoning?
Now, I do have a question. When you guys say it has to be cited, are those loose, general guidelines? Like, what's required as far as citing goes?
We don't have any guidance beyond that. We're not gonna apply architectural guidance to this, application or this permit. Any other questions for the applicant?
No, I have none.
Any concerns,
I have none.
comments? Weston? Nope. Well, I would entertain a motion at this point. This is not a recommendation, this is an approval. This doesn't go to city council.
A recommendation, I make a motion that we recommend the approval of the placement of a Connex box at 122 West 300 North and send that to city council.
No,
No?
we just do it.
Sorry,
No,
no city council.
I'd take the word recommend out. That we approve, just approve
Okay,
it.
Okay, I thought we sent it out. I approve it. I make a motion that we approve it. 122 West 300 North, permanent placement of a Connex box, providing that the city ordinances are mandated or adhered to.
I second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Very well, thank you. Appreciate
Do
it.
I need to get anything approving it, or is it good to go?
I said aye.
You can work with Keith and he'll take care of it.
No,
Thank you.
Okay. Don't forget your diaper bag.
Okay, our next item is our subdivision code rewrite. I think everybody was sent a copy of the Hanson Group initial review of our code. Sometimes they call it an audit, but either way, we got the same results. Did any of you have a chance to look at that?
I can bring it up on the screen if you wanna go through it, or whatever you wanna do.
Yeah, let's bring it up on the screen. I don't know that we need to do a line by line, but there are some high points, I think.
I looked it over and felt to the extent it reflected the previous decisions we made, it did that well, but it seems like there's a couple of, like, basically questions for the committee within your document.
Yeah, mark those when we get to them, we can talk about those.
Yeah, we've been talking about a lot of these things, so a lot of these things aren't gonna be a huge surprise, either talking about them or have gone to trainings where they've talked about it. Major issues and opportunities for improvement, isn't that a really diplomatic way of saying that we need to do this to comply with state law? Review, add a new subdivision application review process for a 1 to 2 family residential use. And that's because the state designates that there's a certain process if it's a single family or dual family subdivision, that it has a different set of rules as far as how we go about it. So they're essentially saying we kind of bifurcate and say, these are the rules if it's a 1 or 2 family subdivision.
And then we have the old set of rules or a modified set of rules.
Or a modified set of rules, as long as, yeah, we can have a slower process if it's not that type of subdivision, But that other process still has maybe other things that would have to be changed.
So how do you view that, being implemented where we have, say, a subdivision that's gonna have, mixed zones? I guess the easiest way to say that. So what if there's a high-density zone and there's a one or two family residential zone?
Well,
They're gonna go through two processes?
No, I'm thinking that they'll probably have a recommendation, but just off the top of my head, we will have a subdivision process, and then we will have a subsection that says if it's a one, two-family residential, they get, this is the timeline, and there will be talk about the timeline, and then they'll say they can skip this, 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 and this. And then, so we have our process, but then we'll have a subsection that says we skip this and this and this. Just like we do that says if it's a less than 10 lot subdivision, the planning commission can void any and all of these things, you know? Something like that that just says we shall skip this, 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 and this. I don't know, just my thought off the top of my head. With this one we've talked about a lot. The city council cannot be the subdivision land use authority, right? So we know that we have to set up a land use authority. We've had a dedicated thing to talk about that. City needs to describe an expedited timeline for review and approval. The current code gives it 45 days to review and approve preliminary applications. Under the new state law, the city is required to complete an initial review of a one, two-family residential application within 30 days after the developer submits a complete application. The city can require modifications but can take no longer than 120 business days total to review subdivision improvement plans. I'm assuming, because I know there's different timelines depending on the classification of city, I'm assuming that Hanson Planning Group got our classification right. Does that sound what you...
Well, I'm not familiar with, different timelines for different classes of cities, but you may be right.
At a training I went to, they discussed it,
okay.
So.
And we don't want to really get into that tonight. I mean,
no.
That's a discussion for a different night. I mean, where we have a city action, do we need to describe something? Hanson Group won't take action on that until we get with them and say, here's what we want to do.
Well, basically, this is what they said. This was the result of our audit, and assuming that we don't have any major questions, they're going to start working on these things.
Yeah.
So that's really all we're doing, is going over what they're going to be working.
Yeah, they're going to present a proposal, and then we're going to have to go through that and make sure we...
Yeah.
Yes.
So I guess really the point of this tonight is to understand what they're about to do.
Yep.
And if there's something that we're going to want to have a little bit more of a microscope on or a magnifying glass, then we need to probably figure out what that is.
Yeah.
The new law permits only one public hearing in the preliminary review process and none in the final review process. City's code does not require a public hearing, but it should be aware of this limitation.
So what they're saying is I'm not sure that...
I'm not sure I agree with what they said our city code does.
I think we have public hearings.
I think it says we'll have 2 public hearings.
Well, I know planning and zoning has one, and then I think city council has at least one.
I think you're right.
Yes.
So, but we do know that the limitation is we can only have 1 public hearing in the preliminary process.
Yeah.
So that'll be part of what we do. I don't know if they're right there, so. According to new law, the city is to consider subdivision improvement plans in either the preliminary or the final applications. They've talked about this a lot at trainings I've been on. We have to decide of where we want the intensive review. Do we want the intensive review on the preliminary or on the final? Right now, our code has we essentially have 3 processes. One is a beginning pre-preliminary, which they call that like a sketch meeting. It's an informal sit-down. That's an optional under our code, and then we have a preliminary. They have all these things that they have to do a preliminary. Then they're supposed to build the subdivision, and then they come in for their final plat, and we approve that. So we now have to decide whether we wanna do our intensive review at which point, but we can't do it at both.
So, just thinking out loud, I think it's in the preliminary phase, because in the preliminary phase, in theory, we don't have a complete application. So we can go through that a number of times, and they haven't submitted a complete application, which, for all intentional purposes, gives us more time to figure things out.
While we're on this subject, I agree. While we're on this subject, we need to address the way our code works.
Yeah.
On another issue that they've talked about, but it's even more of a problem, speaking about preliminary and final plat. The way it works right now is somebody does a preliminary plat, we go into great detail to approve it, make sure they fit code on everything. We then tell them, go forth and build your subdivision. When you get it built with all the improvements, then we will grant a approval of your final plat. At that point, the lots are created as separate lots and can be sold. And the reason we do this is so we don't end up with what we have out on Diane Street. Right. It's a platted subdivision with 0 improvements. And you get people that buy a lot and say, I want to build, and we're like, okay, put in all the improvements. They're like, for my one lot, we're like, well, yeah, you can't build on a lot that it doesn't have water and sewer and power and gas. Well, gas isn't a requirement, but streets. And they're like, well, this is really dumb. I wouldn't have bought this lot if I didn't know. We have a problem out there, right? So our process makes sure that they put in, that the developer puts in all the improvements before that we allow them to sell off lots into individual things. The way that the process is designed now with Utah law, and the way most cities have done this, is we say, fine, we'll give you the final plat, but you have to either have done the improvements first or issue a bond.
Right.
So the city, if you do not finish putting them in, the city can go in, take the bond, put in the improvements, and then it protects the property owners that buy individual lots.
And I thought we have code that allows us to do that. We have code for bonding.
It's pretty vague. Our code does say on the final plat that we won't grant it until the improvements are in.
Yeah, I'll have to look. I'll research that a little bit.
Okay, so this is an area, and please do that, where we need to come up with a process by which we can expedite it according to the rules that are now there, and start issuing or start requiring performance bonds so that we can approve the final plat of the subdivision.
Okay, yeah, I'll look at that.
Okay.
The only reason I know it's there, I've looked at it and scratched my head and go, wonder what that means. You know? But I said, yeah, Dan knows.
The new law gives the city a maximum of 4 review cycles. This is, we've talked about. We get 4 bites at the apple to have them, as long as they're responding to our red lines that says this isn't in code and that isn't in code. If they come back with something that changes those, we have up to 4 of those, and after that, it shall be either granted or denied. But if we deny it, we have to deny it based on something. Right. New law provides potential subdivision applicants the right to a pre-application meeting with the city. That's what I was talking about, that pre-application process. That's if they want it, right? Mm-hmm. The city's current optional concept plan will work, but the new law requires that a meeting to review the concept plan shall be scheduled within 15 days after the applicant requests one. That's just a timeline thing. The new law requires municipalities to approve subdivision applications for a 1 to 2 family residential use if those applications check all the boxes and are compliant with all local ordinances. This is consistent with city's current approach. However, the city can protect the quality of a development by making sure the city's land use ordinances and technical subdivisions are thorough and up to date.
Are they implying that we need to do that, or they're going to help do
They're just saying this is a requirement, you better be aware of it. You know, I don't know if anybody tuned into city council. We had a pretty good discussion about a potential Meisner subdivision coming in. We have all the discretion over annexation, but but some of the concerns is that if somebody does a subdivision that we have to approve it, this is what we were talking about. The new law says that if it's a single-family or dual-family residential subdivision, and they meet all of our code, including zoning, we have to approve it. That's why there's some reticence to this. Remind everybody, with an annexation, it's a legislative decision, we don't have to approve anything. But if Heather buys 20 acres tomorrow and does a subdivision and it meets our code, we have to grant it. That's just what that means is in there, and that's new law, so it.
Yeah, for us, it's not in effect.
In the city, yeah.
Doesn't mean we have to grant annexation.
We don't have to grant annexations, and we do have the ability to negotiate, annexation agreements. By the way, if it's a commercial subdivision, or if it's something that isn't one or two, we have our processes. If it's a master plan zone, we have our full process that we can work through with them. If they request anything other than what I would just call a cut and paste, single-family residential subdivision, then we have the ability to slow it down. And that's if they ask for, I want this zoning to be this here and that there, or I want you to do a PUD, or I want you to do anything that isn't a very specific standard residential, one-family, two-family residential subdivision. We do have the ability to slow down the process and make sure that they're fitting our code and our, and not just our code, but bigger than that. It becomes legislative. Do we want to allow that here?
Well, our code now says that a subdivision has to meet all the other code. So, I mean, we have specific subdivision code, but it points out, it's not just Title 14, it's got to comply with Title 15 as well.
And I guess the point of all this is it's an administrative, you shall grant this subdivision if they check the boxes.
Yes.
That's the overarching point of it.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, we need to add an appeal authority for subdivisions. As previously discussed, our amendment will make the Board of Adjustments the appeal authority.
Yeah.
City's ordinance to provide Board of Adjustment. The board has the appeal authority for land use appeals, but currently do not specify how subdivision appeals should be handled. The state allows for flexibility on this point, but requires municipalities to have a process in place. So we need to put a little bit of thought into that, because our Board of Adjustments isn't really tooled for subdivisions. It's tooled for individual landowners trying to do something or being denied on something, right? So we need to think about that.
Yeah. I wonder if we send them something, if they'd look like deer in the headlights. What?
I'm actually scratching my head. I've been looking this one up and haven't had a chance to fully get to the bottom of it. We need to add a requirement for the city to notify water conveyance facilities and the Utah Geospatial Resource Center.
So water conveyance facilities are canals and ditches and things like that. So I presume that means we would have to notify the pumpers and people that might be affected.
So I'm guessing that's just to make sure that the subdivision gives, if you had a secondary water company with easements going through, a chance for them to review it to make sure it doesn't violate their easements or something. But Utah Geospatial Resource Center, I mean, I've never heard, nobody's mentioned a thing about this thing.
I've never heard of it either.
But I like the idea because I don't think often enough, we'll have somebody come to us and say, yeah, I'm gonna fill in that ditch, and I'm like, whoa, hang on a second, there's easements there. And it's not our easement to protect, it's the irrigation company easement, and they aren't aware of these things until there's something like this that would trigger it, I guess, so.
Right.
Anyways, we'll probably have to add that into our code. Clarify language around performance guarantees and required improvements. Section 14.10.040 of the city code will need some minor clarifying, especially after the code is adjusted. We did talk with Hanson Group about what I was talking about with the final plat and the bonding and all that stuff, and so they're aware that we need to tweak our code to adjust for it. My point is we don't have any real process in place to do these performance bonds, and how do we calculate what they need to be? What's our process? Is there How do we record that? You know, we're just not in the process of doing this. I don't know if we've ever had a subdivision where we've required a performance bond. We've just said, have we?
Yeah.
Oh, great. What one? Do you know?
Oh, we found an expert.
Sorry.
Judy's been around. That's why we love institutional knowledge.
Yeah, I can think of 3, and we've got the files in the vault, so that will.
There we go.
Great.
Thanks for that.
Thank you, Judy. This is, I don't know how much you want to go into.
Well, so everybody has received this via email. I don't think it's a waste of time, but I don't think we need to go through every one of these. If you're interested in these and looking at what's coming up or that we're gonna be talking about, get into your email, print one of these out, or however you like to study, get through there and make some notes.
But more importantly, are we okay with saying, go forth and start working on this? We believe you, and we're gonna have to scrutinize what you come back to us with. I think we are, right? We have a timeline that we've gotta get this thing done by, and it's the end of the year.
Right. Well, I guess the question to the commission, is there anybody that's not comfortable with having the Hanson Group proceed with these refinements that they've described?
Dan, could you scroll back just a couple of bullet points? What is the Utah Geospace Resource Center?
I do not know.
Nobody knows.
Okay.
But 10-9A-603 in state code is gonna tell us all about it. And that's cited right there.
Water conveyance facilities and the Utah Geospace Resource Center.
Okay, so it's a GIS thing. This is, gis.utah.gov, which is what, Global Informational Spacing, it's all of our GIS.
And by the way, that says and, it doesn't say that's not one entity, it could be several entities. So the water conveyance facilities could be multiple, and the Utah Geospace Resource Center is another required notification.
So we'll have to find out what that means.
Yeah,
If we submit the updated plat to these entities,
it out.
some sort of upload.
So I think Hanson Group will have an idea, and we can start from there. I think what it'd be really nice to see from them is just a highlighted format of this document that says, here's specifically what we need from you to be able to finish. So that we're not sitting here waiting for them to bring us back some code with some blank spots in it. Can you scroll that to the next page, Judy? So we see there's an add and refine definitions. It'll be fun to get feedback from them as to what definitions they think we need in light of the fact that we've got a stack of definitions that we're getting ready to send to City Council.
I think more than anything, they're gonna wanna make sure that anything that the new laws talk about, that we don't have a hole for definitions for those things.
Amen to that.
I'm guessing they're not gonna go through our definitions and wordsmith existing things unless they're specifically pertaining, like a pill authority or something like that.
Right. Well, it is interesting, at the bottom of this page, what you can't see yet, it says, edit for plain language throughout. I love that. In addition to the material changes suggested, more minor edits throughout could increase readability in the city's code. They could do just that one thing. Just that one thing. It would be great. add a small section addressing condominiums. Anyway, any specific questions about this?
Can I just point out?
Yeah.
We did have a discussion with them about some different ways of doing your process. We touched on it verbally a minute ago on the pre-meeting, the 4 cycles, and then a final. They have a couple of different proposed processes. One's
preliminary and one's final.
One's preliminary, one's final, but then they have a way to basically do them in a different approach. So I would look through those and think through it. So he does ask at the end of his letter, before my team and I proceed with our edits, please let us know your preferences on the following. Whether the city has changed its mind on continuing with a 2-phase approach. That's what I'm talking about, preliminary and final.
Mm-hmm.
Per our previous discussions, it is our understanding you would like to keep the preliminary and final approval process separate. We will proceed with that understanding. Please notify us if after further discussion you switch to a combined approach. That's back to this. If we were to switch to a combined approach, it would be a different methodology that we would use.
So where I really get hung up is I believe it's really difficult for an applicant for a subdivision to submit a complete application. If we go through our code and look at all the things that are required in a complete application, that is a ton of work. And so I wonder, I kinda like the process where there's a pre-application meeting and we tell them, yeah, we'll work with them and help them figure out what we need to do. Then we get them to sit down and start filling out or working through the application, and they're gonna come in and it's not gonna be complete. And that's where we sit down and say, you missed this and this and this and this.
But that's the purpose of the 4 iterative redlinings.
Right. And I think that's a value-added process. Yeah, I'm not real excited about getting into a box that says they submit a preliminary and that's also the final. And we get the final and we get 1 review cycle. I think that's great if we're all on board and on top of it all, and I'm not sure if we are able to operate like that. Because also remember, we've got time constraints with all of those. So we're looking at those and what does it say for the final application, 1 cycle? They have a year to submit the final application in this combined process, or the final process.
They post performance guarantees, that's what we talked about with the bond, or complete improvements and records plats within 365 days. So that's saying they have a year to do the improvements or give us a performance bond after it's totally approved. Now we're talking about putting the stuff in the ground. That's post-approval actions.
So I think we've been fortunate in that we haven't had any really big things, in my opinion, really big subdivisions, but we're about to get one. And, if we think about how we work through these processes, what's that do for us? I mean, in my opinion, the state has set these up so that the developer has the upper hand, so to speak, and the city, in some regards, is in scramble mode, in our case. We have options. We can say we don't have the manpower to do it, and we can require the contractor to pay for somebody, to be that person. that works through the entire process with them, but then at the end of the process, we have to give them full credit against impact fees or something, so we would be paying for that in the end.
So, that is the first thing that we need to discuss. Do we keep the two-phase approach, or do we consider some sort of a combined approach? The second thing is whether you would like to review subdivision improvement plans in the preliminary or the final phase of the application. Note, the Planning Commission cannot be the land use authority for the final phase. Given this, many municipalities choose to review improvement plans in the preliminary phase.
And in our case, the Planning Commission is never the land use authority.
Right. So, but we still have to decide if we want to see their heavy plans in the preliminary or the final. That's a decision that's going to change considerably how they write the code, these three things. That's why I really can't move forward until we give them direction on these three.
Well, yeah, so we're moving in a direction that says for these 1 and 2 family residential things where we've decided already that there's a 3-body committee, or 3-person committee, if you will, to make those decisions. I think it would make sense if the 3 people sat down and just talked through this process and just, with an end in mind of let's step through one based on the collective experience and figure out what makes the most sense for us. And then we have Hanson Group that we can call and go, what about this and what about that? But, I think once we get this done, it'll be quite some time before we have any opportunity to revise it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so let me just see if I can restate and see if I understand what you're saying. We have discussed who we would have as our land use authority. Why not sit down as that land use authority and talk through a conceptual subdivision application and kind of decide what would work the best and answer these questions 1, 2, and 3.
Right, because I think it would be really nice to come back and say, okay, we picked this particular model that they drew, and then let them go away and write the code for that, and then bring it back to us, and then the whole commission can take a look at it, and then the small committee would be pretty well set to answer any questions and talk and walk through that process.
So explain in that second item where it says, note that the planning commission cannot be the land use authority for the final phase. So does that mean they can't be it for the first phase?
We could have 2 different land use authorities if we wanted to allow the planning commission to be involved as a land use authority. We could have them be the land use authority for the preliminary and a different land use authority for the final.
Right.
It's just that now you're making it complicated, and not only that, what we're really doing is digging into all of the technical aspects of a subdivision. Do you want to have the planning commission do something on the preliminary side of things? Because we're not preempted from that.
Well, that's what I'm saying. 2 perspectives might not hurt.
The challenge that I see with that, thinking out loud, if the planning commission is assigned as the land use authority for a preliminary phase, and then the planning commission approves it and says, yeah, this looks good, and we recommend it to the next land use authority, which might be the council or whoever it is.
No, it can't be.
No, it's that
Well,
three.
It'd be that
Okay,
3-person body.
Yeah.
Back off, whoever it is.
Yeah.
Okay, so we recommend it to the next land use authority, whoever that may be, or whatever that might look like, and now they don't agree. Now you gotta hammer out that.
Well, isn't that the process?
Well,
So
Yes
that
and no.
you don't miss something, or you don't lose a perspective, or?
Yeah, I would argue that the planning commission is not very well equipped to look at a preliminary application and decide things like, where does the fire hydrant go? Do you have enough of them? We are not engineers. We can't do it. So we would have to submit it, just like we would now. I presume that, Dan, you submit plans and things to the engineering firm, right?
Yep.
To get recommendations. So we're all on the same team. So why would we do it twice is what I think. And like I said, me as a planning commissioner, I'm looking at that going, I don't want to be the guy that says, yeah, you look good, and then have it go forward and go, you missed this and this and this and this, because I don't have an engineering background, and I'm not sure anybody here does. And so if we can figure out how to
is there
work
any
through
checks and balances for that preliminary committee? I mean, if you have that 3 individual committee, or they're gonna do both, preliminary and the final.
Only on 1 and 2 family residentials.
Right.
The check and balance is we use a third-party engineering firm, and they check it against our code. And at the end of the day, that's the only thing we're doing, is saying, does this meet code?
So who are you recommending for the 3 individual committee, or however you want to define it?
That's been voted on and decided.
So what is it?
And so it was, the planning and zoning administrator, the assistant planning and zoning administrator, and the planning and zoning chair.
Wait a minute.
1, 2, 3.
Keith, Dan, and Larry.
Yeah, you didn't, okay, you said planning and zoning, you didn't mention the city manager.
He's not wearing his city manager hat when he's doing that. He's
Oh.
wearing his planning and zoning administrator.
And we did that on purpose, in case the duties are ever split in the future.
Okay. Well, I just wanted that stated so everybody knows,
Okay,
so the public and everybody knows.
perfect.
Does anybody have any, as you've listened to this, because I like Larry's approach, but I'm just wondering, does anybody in the planning commission have any, comments on the 2-phase approach, preliminary and final, versus a single combined approach? And do you have any questions on 3? I never actually read 3. And 3 basically says, do you have 2 different subdivision processes, or does all of your subdivision process look like the shorter, truncated timeline that you have for a 1-family, 2-family subdivision? In other words, do you guys want to keep a standard process for a commercial subdivision, for multifamily subdivision, and only have the fast track for what we have to have a fast track on?
That's what I prefer.
Yeah.
What?
Only fast track what we're required to fast track.
Yeah.
Okay, because that's what 3 is asking.
Because I believe the bigger something gets, the more work it is, the harder it is to get your arms around it. And, I look at the, development you mentioned earlier that's requesting annexation now, and I go, that's a big old thing. We don't know what it looks like. We have no idea what's gonna be in it, and we don't know how long we're gonna have to process it. And I'm going,
I do too.
holy cow.
Because if you don't do that, then what about a PUD?
About what?
A PUD?
Oh.
Would you want a PUD on a fast track? Would you want a commercial subdivision on a fast track? So, that one's easy. There's a consensus. At least I haven't seen anybody say, no, I want to fast track them all. So, a lot of, we're scratching our head maybe about the 2-phase approach with preliminary and final. So we can talk through, I like Larry's idea of actually talking through what has to be done if you guys remember, Larry created a while back a document, I don't know how many pages it is, it's like 5 pages.
Too many, yeah.
And it references the preliminary, and it talks about all of the things in our code says to happen in the preliminary, and then it has everything in the code that it says has to happen in the final. That's what we're talking about, is possibly rolling that into a single process. It doesn't focus on the two, or whether we keep it as the two.
Anyway, I'm confident we can get through that.
I think so,
I don't think it's as hard as we think it is, but I think it's gonna take a half a day or so to just walk through some of those and discuss options.
So do we want to come up with an idea and some recommendations, bring it back to the planning commission?
Absolutely.
And then we'll put the planning commissions, yep, let's move ahead, and then we'll tell Hanson Planning, so let's do it between now and the next meeting.
Okay. You're the short straw in the file.
Was that a short joke?
I was gonna say, that could be taken
Yes.
literally.
Everybody knows that I am not a tall man.
You're the long straw in the short pile.
Short man complex, you just triggered it. I'm totally joking, I don't care. I've been short my whole life. I'm not getting any taller because I want to get taller. How about next Tuesday?
What date is that?
It's the 25th of June.
I'll confirm in the morning.
Let's talk about
I might
it.
be out of town on Tuesday.
Okay, and then we can pick another time if that works.
Is there a commission meeting next Thursday?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I'm out of town until Thursday.
Do you schedule your out of town so you can avoid the council meeting?
No, so I can make the meeting.
Oh, okay, all right.
I know what's going on because I make sure I'm gonna be around. So, I'm gone Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday I know wouldn't be good for you,
Date's the 27th,
but anytime the following week.
first week of July,
Or Friday.
Friday the 20th.
Yeah, any of that.
Being right, I am.
You gonna go see the Bean while he's, at the
Poor guy.
funeral?
What are you going to the Windy City for?
Funeral.
I need to go, is that all right? Is that all right, Larry? May I be excused?
Yes, you may.
Judy, may I?
Thank you.
Mayor? Sir? Okay. Dan?
Don't ask me, you know I don't tell you what
Could
to
we
do.
do a roll call vote? Thanks.
Okay, any other discussions on that subdivision code review? I think we have a move ahead plan, so we'll get together, get something and make a recommendation back here. Dan, I think it's okay to tell Hanson group to move ahead.
Yeah.
With what they can.
With what they can, yeah.
Yeah, and that we'll get to them.
We'll get to a few of the other little things.
Yeah,
Okay, I'll do that.
okay. I can call them, if you want.
Go for it.
Okay.
I did? Get it? Okay.
Enjoy your party.
All right, the next item is external accessory dwelling unit, code development. So in the last meeting, there was a discussion about, basically, did we want, to apply maximum sizes in code. And so the message I got reading the minutes was that we made a vote that EAD, in lieu of maximum sizes, that EADUs should not exceed 25% of front, side, or backyards. And so that was the end of that. And I understand that vote, so now I have a question. If, as stated, if we state it that simplistically, we have basically not required ADUs to comply with, standard setbacks. So if we just look at them and go, well, as long as they don't take up more than 25% of any of the 3 yards.
There was some
No, I don't-
discussion
yeah.
about setbacks,
No.
well, there was discussion about
Yeah.
setbacks.
Okay, I didn't see any mention of that in the motion, so we're good with the setbacks?
I'm pretty sure
Oh,
we
yeah.
put in there.
Yeah, I don't think you're gonna exclude yourself.
Yeah, no,
and
Well, I don't think we should, I just wanted to make sure.
No, I
that
don't
we're-
think that was.
yeah.
Okay, perfect, thank you for that clarification. I know, it was hard to hear on the phone, some of that back and forth
Mhm.
stuff. So I sent everybody, sort of a marked up version that crossed out a bunch of notes and things on there, and eliminated the maximum sizes, and made a couple other small edits. One of the questions I still had was at the bottom of page 2, we had separate utility connections and separate utility meters for EADUs are prohibited. And then the question was, or, an alternate statement that said separate utility connections and separate utility meters for EADUs are allowed with the payment of impact fees and other associated fees. Pick one would be my preference.
To do this chronologically, should we go back and do whether external ADUs can be used as short-term rentals?
Where are you?
Page 2.
Oh, I'll get there in a minute. I added quite a few more questions to that, so I don't think that has any bearing on this particular question. It's more a question for Dan or Judy.
Can I ask a question? If they're gonna have separate utility meters, then do they need to bring in water?
I think
Yep.
that's where the
Yeah.
discussion
Yep.
stopped
Yeah.
last.
That's easy, on water, it's easy. On power, sewer, it gets a little more vague, but that's typically what we have. Judy, you and I have talked about this for a couple of years now. Where do you say what triggers a second impact fee? Because what if, let's say somebody builds a garage, this happens a lot, and they wanna just tie on to the house, right? They wanna tie onto the house for power, and they wanna tie onto the house for water. If they haven't upsized their meter, or they haven't upsized what we deliver to them, I've made the argument, in fact, it hasn't just been an argument, it's been our policy, is we're not gonna trigger them needing to pay an impact fee, 'cause they're just using the capacity that we've already given them. But if they wanna connect a new connection to run their garage, adding a secondary meter, at that point, it would trigger an impact fee and a secondary connection fee. The connection fee just reimburses the city for the actual cost of the city for that additional connection, but the impact fee is because they now have the ability to put two demands on the system, and that whole point of the impact fee is just to cover the additional demand. Our water code is very clear, and it says it's all meter-based right now. So if you add a second meter, but it's the same principle. So that's what we've done typically, and I would think that it would apply to an ADU as well. If they run a sub-panel off of their main panel from a power perspective, and they run a little mother-in-law apartment, our impact fee is based on the amperage of the panel that they have in their house. And if they can do that without overloading the system, they haven't triggered a need for an impact fee. That's the idea, and does everybody feel comfortable with that? 'Cause that's how we're doing it.
So you're more comfortable, if I understood that, with the second statement, separate utility connections and separate meters are allowed with the payment of impact fees and other associated fees? Does that need to be modified, or?
Yeah, with the payment of impact fees and other associated fees, including water. If they go adding a second water meter, then they're gonna have to bring water to the city. That's clear as day in our water code. That would be part of the other associated fees.
But we're making it optional either way is what you're.
Yeah, it's optional.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, it's optional, not mandatory.
Right.
Yeah.
When they add a separate connection, 'cause they choose to, at
Right.
that point, they trigger
But
additional
like you
fees. But if they
described
just
the
come off their house,
Yeah, if you described from the beginning, they do have the option to just
yeah.
hook
Now,
it.
let's say that they wanna run a big garage and they wanna come off a 100 amp service on their house. The electrician's gonna say, no, you gotta upsize your service. And let's say now, that's all they do. They say, fine, I just wanna upgrade the amperage of the service to my house and then piggyback it. There's actually a difference in impact fee of a 100 amp versus a 200 amp, let's say. So they would pay the difference. They would pay an impact fee of the difference.
Yeah.
Because they're up, and that's just like today, if somebody comes in and says, I need to upsize from this to that, we're gonna say, okay, that's a bigger impact on our system.
But they've just
I wanna
paid-
charge 2 Tesla trucks and my service is severely undersized. We're gonna say, okay, well, there's all everything back throughout the system that's gonna impact, and so it would trigger the upsizing of that.
But they just pay the difference, not a total
Right.
new impact
What would
fee.
cause a new impact fee is a separate connection.
Okay, but I'm looking at then, when we're trying to determine how many sewer connections we have in town, how many water connections we have in town, because actually we're putting another building.
But we're doing it by the meters. That's how we're counting it. Or in the case of sewer, it's taps onto the main line.
Well, I think what I'm
Laterals.
trying to say is, then when we're trying to determine
How many?
how
It still will be one.
You mean total?
That's the problem. So what you're saying is we would then have a non-accurate count. And I'm saying it depends on your definition of, if it's one connection for a house and then they have an EADU, you're saying, should that be counted as 2 connections? And I'm saying, it's based on the meter.
If it fits through one tie-in, then.
If it's their one tie-in, we're gonna count it as a single residential.
I guess I was looking more at sewer, and I don't think we can even figure that one out.
With sewer, again, we're looking at number of laterals. It gets a little weird with sewer because you could have a multifamily unit that has a single pipe coming out. How do you count that connection? What is that important for, from a reporting standpoint,
Well, I'm just trying to, when we are
for billing?
capacity in our sewer lagoon, we don't have a correct count of how many, what our, you know what I'm...
Generally, our sewer is, our capacity is by millions of gallons.
So it's by a meter,
Uh-huh.
big meter.
That's generally how we look at it.
Yeah, there must be some margin for error in there. I mean,
There's a few of them.
somebody must be able to
I'm
say,
just thinking reporting, because I do the reports, and we don't have an accurate report then on how many electric meters, or, we would on electric meters, I'm just saying how many services we
Yeah.
service from one electric meter.
AC is killing me.
Right. Well, so like,
Cool, isn't it?
like the Falcon Ridge development, it's a single parcel. What's the one, right out by KB,
Yeah,
Foothills.
Foothills.
Those are tricky because you have a single master meter, right? So from the city's perspective, it's a single master meter, and then there's multiple units in there. So this would add some vagueness to our counts.
So would you charge them for 2 meters then? Even, because for fourplex, there's 1 meter, but we charge all four water fees.
Because they have 4 accounts, how does that work? Or what do we do?
So if there's an apartment building, they each have their own account, so we have 4 accounts. And we and electric's easy because they all have their own electric meter.
Mhm.
But they all get a water fee and a sewer fee.
But it's not how does that work with the fee where it's based on the number of total gallons?
So they each get the 5,000 gallons. So the fourplex would get 20,000 gallons. Anything overage goes to the landlord.
Oh, is that how we do that?
remember that discussion, yeah.
So we're gonna this could potentially have create some loose ends that we would then have to chase down from a utility billing standpoint.
I would just send one bill to the landlord and let him sort it out with his
He
unit.
can, that's why, I think why we originally said that there weren't, separate units were not permitted, was because it needs to go to the landlord, and the landlord will need to just incorporate that into what they charge for rent.
Yeah, he can rebill it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think that that's why we put it that way.
I remember the discussion, though, that Dan brings
Never miss an opportunity.
fees and meters and so on.
Well, the or sounds like that's an option.
Well, it's an option just because that's how I drafted the code.
But we would need
Not
to
intended
decide
to be a code, an
Okay.
option in code. It's
What do we
make a
wanna do?
decision.
Yeah.
Whatever's the least pain in the neck for the city.
I guarantee you that whichever way we go, there's gonna be some weird exceptions that we're gonna have to address.
I mean, obviously with EADUs, you're not dealing with 4 different units.
Right.
Yeah,
No, you're really talking about a unit.
yeah.
And does it need to be separately metered? I would, again, lean to the or there, just because that's consistent with how we're doing things now with, additional, buildings,
Well, wait.
accessory buildings. If they wanna run something for this gazebo, or they wanna do a garage, that's typically how we've done it in the past.
Are you saying leave both statements in?
No,
Oh, okay.
I'm saying use the or statement there.
Second statement,
The second statement.
okay, with adding the words including water.
Yes, and that's consistent with how we're approaching it with most things on a day-to-day basis.
But it's allowed, not required.
Yeah, is allowed.
So again, I just wanna remind everybody, these are not cast in concrete.
Yeah.
We're not gonna finish this code tonight. This is to move forward, to get it closer to a final version and get some of the decisions made that, okay, so.
Wait, pause.
This is the most random idea, but you know how if you get a second trash can, you have to pay for the second trash can? If you have a second dwelling unit, why wouldn't you pay a second sewer charge?
Because you're fitting it through your existing connection if it will handle volume.
So you're kind of talking about ultimately a sizing conversation, right? You could have a small house with a small additional dwelling unit that uses less than a very big house. The trash can thing is easy, 'cause you have this very limited quantity, and it's optional. Once they use more, they add more. But when you get to square footages of houses and EADUs, I think about the only fair way to do it is based on the capacity of the pipe. And if we've given them that pipe and they're able to accomplish what they want to within that capacity, then they should be on it. That's the idea. I'm not arguing with you, I'm just saying that's the idea.
And you might have a situation where maybe a house has 3 bathrooms, but it could have had 5 bathrooms. But now we have a 3-bathroom house and a accessory with a bathroom.
That has 2 bathrooms.
One.
Still not necessarily exceeding what the house's full potential could be.
So like on the bill, when we have a water bill and it exceeds a certain amount, doesn't the sewer get a surcharge for that
Or
excess?
commercial.
Only on
Only
commercial?
commercial.
So that's what I'm associating. So once it hits a threshold and it's beyond that, then there's an additional charge because we know that then it's sewer capacity situation.
So wouldn't
If
the
it's
fair way to do it be like number of fixtures or something like that? If you were to say you've crossed the threshold, you would almost have to do it by number of fixtures rather than number of buildings, because again, you get
Like
to this fairness
4
argument of
bathrooms.
small houses
You're-
versus really large houses.
I'm just saying it's worth talking about.
Yeah.
Because there is a difference between 2 families. Let's just say it's 2 complete families.
Oh yeah, sewer is the one thing of all these utilities that's the odd man out. There isn't a meter on it.
Yeah.
Yet the city's sewer system, we have to process every gallon. And there are some that add a lot more gallons that we have to process than others, so what's the fair way to do it?
Thank you. All right, let's close the discussion on that particular one for now.
Tired of talking about sewer, Larry?
Talking about, yeah, the other one.
It's a shitty statement.
And we've got the piece of code that external ADUs will have a separate address from the primary, do we all agree on that?
Yeah.
Yes.
If separate utility connections is the key factor of there, right?
Well, the other thing, it was an emergency issue. So an emergency responder needs to know which unit to go to, not waste time going to the front door and going, oh, no, it's in the back.
So are you saying get rid of the if separate utility connections and just say it's always required?
No.
What did
I'm
we
just saying external ADUs,
What did we decide the trouble with A and B is?
Yeah, it would be always. Pardon?
We talked about A, B in the same address rather than two addresses. Did we decide there was an issue with that?
Not that I know of.
If I remember the discussion,
That seems a lot simpler.
I think and Judy was gone and we were wishing she was here because she is the guru of billing. I think we determined if you have separate meters, meaning you're gonna be billing them different, we for sure need to have different addresses to make it kind of clear to our billing system and all that. But for I understand what you're saying, Larry, is make them always have a separate address.
I am, because Keith made the argument when we had this discussion about emergency responders.
Right.
So you call an ambulance or you call the police because there's an active shooter.
Yeah,
You don't want to go to the wrong door.
Right.
The wrong unit.
Doing the same address with just B would suffice for a different address, right?
Say that again?
Doing the same address, but with, say, unit B, that would suffice for
Yeah, as long as
separate
it's
address?
clearly labeled.
Yeah, that would technically be a separate address, right?
Yeah, I've seen code that says that if you're gonna have that, you need to name the primary address, your address plus A, and the external unit is the address plus B.
Okay, so I'm going with that we're gonna have separate addresses. And I'll put some language in about A and B. It'll just be a sentence, we've done that before.
And scratch the utility, the if, tie on to that.
Yeah, I'll get it. Yeah. Okay, next question, further down the page, the accessory dwelling unit must meet the setbacks for the main structure for the zone, and the setbacks listed in, and I put a piece of code there as a placeholder, because what I discovered is there's some other setbacks, and I haven't had time to fully explore those yet, so it's kind of a placeholder, so I think we can just move on until I finish my homework there.
Did we last time have talk about that it doesn't necessarily have to only be in the rear lot?
Right, and I will modify that.
Okay.
And so it's not the rear lot, it's the side, the front.
Yeah.
We made a vote on that, though. You're being consistent with that vote. is
Yes.
all I'm
Yes,
getting.
I will, and I had that language, I just missed it when I grabbed this code.
I just didn't want to rehash it.
Mm-mm.
Yeah. Thank you. Me either. So item C, I think, was that killed? In no case shall a detached accessory dwelling unit exceed 50% of the square footage of the primary dwelling. I think the agreement was that all of that maximum size was limited by setbacks and the 25% rule.
Yes, I think that's...
Okay. I'm just gonna delete all that. Okay, now going down to some other questions. Okay, here's a question to the group. So we talked about maximum size. Now we need to know, should EADUs have a minimum size?
Well, I think building code defaults to that?
So here's what, so we call for, we follow the IBC, and that in turn follows the IRC. And the IRC updated their most recent thing. I gave you all a handout that talked about minimum sizes by the IRC. The minimum, there's two different words in there. There's like habitable space, and there's dwelling units. But a habitable space has a specific definition, and the minimum size of a habitable space by the IRC is 70 square feet. So think about that.
But I think habitable, but for it to be a living space, it has to have a restroom, it has to have, like, a 70 square foot unit would not by default be considered habitable.
Right, it's not, it doesn't become a dwelling unit. It's habitable space, and that's generally defined as a room. But then by IRC standards, they move on to describe that there has to be a kitchen area is an exception. So when you add a kitchen area to make it a dwelling and a sanitary area and a sleeping area kind of a thing, there's nothing in there that says the kitchen area can't be part of the one room 70 square feet, as long as it has a sink and whatever else they have to have for the kitchen. And that's all in that document that I handed you, and I don't think we need to go through all that tonight, but you should go through it and understand, because at least I often talk loosely about, oh yeah, we'll do whatever the IRC said, and I looked at that and I went, oh yeah, this is not going to work. So the other thing that the IRC has, and it's not in this document, they have the Appendix Q, which is for tiny homes, which are something under 400 square foot. Mm-hmm. Now, it's my recommendation that we somehow arrive at a size, whether it's subjective, supportable or not. Once it goes to code, it's in code. But we need to put some discussion to, should we have a minimum size, and what should that be? And here's why. When we get to the topic of minimum size, if we get into the 400 square foot category, we're now talking about tiny homes. And now when we talk about tiny homes, we've got another, loosely said, can of worms to deal with. One is, what is the code going to be for tiny homes? Where can we put tiny homes? Can tiny homes be external ADUs? Do they need to be on a permanent foundation? Can they be on wheels? Do they need to be, and what kind of connections do they have to utilities, and so on and so on. And I'm not sure that I think we should go there for external ADUs. I think it's almost, tiny homes are almost an exclusive category. However, I don't want to close the door on that, because, well, for obvious reasons, that we need to have the discussion. And so my ask on that is, please read that document about minimum size with IRC. You can find online the IRC Appendix Q. Now, I have to tell you that Appendix Q in the IRC does not apply to our city because we have not specifically adopted it. So any of the IRC appendices have to be specifically adopted by the city, so it's not like we're having anything shoved down our throats. But I believe it's time we have that discussion and make those decisions or recommendations. So I'm going to move on from that question. And the next question kind of relates to tiny homes again. Should an EADU be required to have a permanent foundation? We have to address that if we address tiny homes, or if we get too small.
Can I do not want this to be a rabbit hole or a tangent, but it literally came up
Okay, 5 minutes.
today. is an RV parked in a backyard and hooked to power an EADU?
No.
Is an RV parked?
Yeah.
Oh, parked.
Parked in the backyard?
Absolutely not. Go read code 15.56.030.
Okay, is a camper?
No.
It's an RV.
Has it got an axle and wheels?
Camper doesn't. I mean, some of them do.
I see, like a,
Let's say it's a camper out of the back of a truck and you set it on the ground and say, now it's an ADU.
That's a nuisance.
No.
Okay, I'm just saying, 'cause it will come up.
Well, you're gonna have to hook it to sewer and,
We might want to, we might wanna tighten up our RV. Because if I remember right, if you have two RVs, then there's all these rules about RVs. But what about a single one? People all the time wanna park an RV on the side of their house.
no, it's in code. Judy, will you bring up the RV code 1556 or 65?
Sorry.
1556.050.
050.
Well, it's gonna be, can you scroll up to, or the other way, to 030?
Look.
Item 1, occupied RVs shall not be permitted in Parowan, Utah, except under the following conditions. When located in an approved RV park, or when temporarily located on a lot while a main building is being constructed thereon, but not for more than 1 year. A validly issued, unexpired, and unrevoked building permit is required, and applicants for a building permit shall submit a site plan and proof and blah, 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 da, da, da.
So when is an RV occupied versus isn't?
Versus what?
Is not occupied.
If
It's plugged in, but people plug in their RVs all the time.
If somebody's living in it.
Mhm.
Okay, Keith, binoculars. I got an assignment for you. It's like 20 homes.
No,
I'm serious.
I'm serious as a heart attack.
I'm serious. 'Cause we have complaints and we need to look at it.
We've got several complaints, and I get complaints all the time personally. And I go, I'm not enforcement, here's Dan Jessen's number. So, Keith, I see they're calling you.
downhill, huh?
But yeah, honestly, I mean, we do need to enforce that. I have one across the street from my house. I have another one across around the corner on 300,
Yeah, I think I've got somebody
you know, and
on the corner.
And I mean, people come say they have lights on all the time, they got 3 cars parked there, they're plugged in, they got a sewer hose running somewhere. You know, and I go, well, so, where are they putting that? In the garden? You know, or, you know, do they have a tap? But the point is, it's not allowed.
Mm-mm.
Okay,
My 2 cents just on the tiny home thing
yes,
is I think that it is a bigger, obstacle to work through, that I think that our focus should be on EDUs, that are permanent, but then once we have that worked and, established, that then we branch into potentially discussion and looking at specific tiny home code.
and, okay,
Just because I think it's just I don't wanna delay getting some sort of EADU code to city council for approval. I think the tiny homes, as much as you know, I am a fan of that, I think that that's going to delay us getting it to city council.
okay, so if I understood you correctly, you're on a path to let's get EADU code finished and approved, and then move into the tiny home.
Yes.
Okay, and you understand that said, that there'll be some conflict between if you've already got an EADU on the property locating a tiny home on the property as a second
Yes,
thing
it would be one, yes, it would be no, I don't think that you should be permitted to have a permanent, permanent structure, EADU, and an occupied tiny home.
Okay,
That
so we're
would
good.
be considered a second. No, I think that it should be one or the other.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Well, I like that approach. Anybody else have issue with that? Okay. That's the path I'll go down as I put this together. Again, we can always reconsider. The next question I have is, should EADUs be allowed as short-term rentals? Again, I want to remind you that this is draft code. We can write it one way and cut it out later. We can revisit it, but in the interest of kind of moving forward, what are we thinking?
As I looked over this, I couldn't think of a reason why we shouldn't allow it to also be for short-term rental.
We should or should not?
Should not.
Okay. Anybody else? Any opinions? Weston, what are you thinking? I know.
I wanna say it's okay.
My.
I wanna say it should be the property owner's right to do what he wants with that, but it can also be quite a nuisance to the neighborhood, too.
Yeah, right.
Turning
There are
everything into a
licensing issues
hotel.
and things like that you have to deal with as well. You just can't arbitrarily rent out that thing without the proper,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Approval and the licensing and all the other stuff.
I'd imagine our external accessory dwelling units are gonna require the same extra parking, right,
Mhm.
that everything else does.
Right. So just know that, we agreed earlier on as we wrote this, we'd do the IADU code, which we completed, and the definitions in the EADU code, and we were gonna do short-term rentals at the same time. So we're trying to get this EADU stuff down the road far enough, and I think now's the time to think about, should it be a short-term rental? But don't worry too much about how will we control short-term rentals, because as we get into the short-term rental code, then we'll start talking about what can be a short-term rental, what can't, how many can we have, how far apart do they need to be, and that sort of a thing.
Are you wanting an answer on this tonight, or more just get the wheels going?
You could get the wheels going, but I've got a list, so we will talk about it.
No, yeah, no.
So, I'd be okay with that if you wanna put some thought to it. You can't have a quorum outside of this meeting, but I encourage you to call each other and talk, or call me to just bounce some ideas, one direction or another.
I guess my first initial thought is that with the state and the IADUs, those are not permitted to be short-term rentals, because the purpose and the point is to, if you're going to do that, to increase housing availability.
Yes, exactly.
So, at this point, the state has not gotten to external, so I would say my first gut reaction is to leave it open to short-term rentals until the state comes back with their own code and says, here or there.
Okay, so stated in a different way, and I don't mean this as an attack.
No.
That means you're in favor of not making long-term housing available. You would rather have short-term housing available.
Not necessarily. I'm just saying that if somebody is looking at, right now today, with our potential code, if they're looking to do short-term rental, they would have to do an EADU.
Pretty much, yeah.
You know what I mean? And so, that's the only, that gives, if somebody's really wanting to have, and to go that route, there is that route available.
Any other comments?
Oh, gosh, it's
Troy, I got yours. You're thinking we shouldn't? I'm thinking we should. Weston? Jerry?
I'm conflicted.
I mean, I'm conflicted as well, without a doubt. I'm not, but I'm just saying that with where we're at, this would give an option for the people who are really wanting that.
What's funny to me is you have to have a sign off from your neighbors to do a home business, right? But you can turn your casita into a motel room.
No, there's,
It'd be a home occupation if you're gonna.
yeah, you have to,
Oh,
now we
okay.
do, you do have to have,
Yeah.
you have to get a permit or a business license now.
All right, here's what I
Do
propose.
you have to have
Short-term
your neighbors
rental.
sign off?
Yeah,
When did that come about?
Well, we don't have to have them sign off, we send a thing that gives the neighbors an opportunity to protest. If they protest, it comes here for a conditional use permit.
right.
So here's what I propose to do, and unless I get some hard objections. I'm gonna write it in here as allowing them, EADUs to be short-term rentals. And it won't take much to do that, 'cause it's pretty much gonna say it's allowed in accordance with short-term rental regulations.
Right.
And then we'll go from there. So could we bring up code 1548.050?
Airport,
Is that what that is?
Yeah, airport.
compatible land use regulations, airport?
No, try 44. I think I'm trying for
Trying to
rural
get it over.
estates.
That's 44.
Thank you.
Judy's got you though.
Wait a minute, sorry, I had the wrong one. 44?
1544.050. So this is specific to rural estates. Anybody have any concerns about any of that?
Well, the way you said it, I feel like the answer should be yes.
No, I just looked at it and, like I said, I combed through a lot of code and trying to, get some of this stuff moving forward. And I just happened to stumble on that, and I noticed that it was the setbacks were quite a bit different than for R1, R2, R3, and so on. And, in light of the piece of code that says in our document, and the setbacks listed in that piece of code where I put 15xxx.xxx, if they are greater than the main structure setbacks. And so you would have to look at this piece of code and go, woohoo. The minimum rear yard requirement for accessory buildings shall be 30 feet. That would apply to EADUs. And again, we're talking rural estates, so these are what, minimum 1 acres?
This is for just the main structure though, right? These setbacks?
No, actually, they talk about accessory buildings here. For example, in C, the last sentence reads, the minimum rear yard for accessory buildings shall be
For
30 feet.
any main building.
No.
Where am I missing oh, I'm sorry, found the word accessory. Woo.
And that accessory exists in the middle line under B. It's like the fifth word in. And on A, it exists in the second sentence.
So I guess I'm not understanding what you're getting at. With rural estates, generally you have large lots.
Right.
And so, basically, if we restrict the EADUs to within the setbacks, they'll just be farther from the property line.
And I'm okay with that. I just want to make sure that, you know.
And I think the whole idea is to preserve a more of a spread out thing.
Yes, no argument.
Yeah, the 25% rule does not, it says in any residential zone, and this is a residential zone, so yeah, it would apply.
Okay. So I'm gonna assume we're good with that. Again, we can revisit it, anytime. Next item that I would love to discuss is, I'm not real familiar with this, but reading it, and hopefully it's simple language and not some weird thing. The airport overlay restricts the approach zones to one dwelling per 10,000 square foot. So a quarter acre lot can only have one dwelling if it's in the approach zone. The approach zone extends 2 miles out from the end of the runway. So, as an example, there is a development ready for, well, potentially to be annexed on the west side of 600 West that is in the approach zone, which means they could only have one unit per quarter acre, one dwelling unit. And the real question, the real reason I'm talking about this at this point, presumably that excludes EADUs because you're not going to be able to put a second dwelling on a quarter acre.
What's the reasoning behind the rule?
Plane crashes.
No,
That's in all our code, Jerry. When you read it, it
It's
says,
trying to
here's
keep-
why we did this.
It's trying to keep density down, so if there's a plane crash, you don't take out a whole apartment building, you take out maybe a house.
Take out, one or
Plane's
two.
gotta have room to crash, Jerry.
Crash, you gotta have crash area.
Probably to lessen the loss of life
Yeah.
during catastrophes.
Yep,
So that approach zone starts at 500 feet wide
right.
at the end of the runway, and as it extends out to 2 miles, it's 1,700 feet wide.
Wow.
So it's 800 feet each side of
Let's just do away with the airport.
the. I was down at your place listening to that, and I thought, I'm surprised you don't complain about that every day.
Or
You
somebody
don't
said,
hear it
a
anymore.
couple of years ago, I remember, sounds like Vietnam, when they were taking the helicopters up and down there, somebody complained.
Yeah, when you bring a car to Weston, he says, that sounds more like an airplane engine
It
than a
does.
car. It needs some work.
It doesn't really bother me unless they fly right over
Yeah.
property. If they just stay in their predetermined approach areas, it's
Yeah.
okay, but.
Anyway, I presume that is an applicable piece of code. that
And,
we need
and,
to
and
take-
we are gonna have to update our airport overlay zone per Utah code. We're gonna have to update it.
Is it gonna get bigger or smaller?
It's just gonna, we have to have one, and it'll have to be defined.
Isn't it FAA that forces the?
Yes and no, not as much as you would think. It is a state and a local land use issue.
Oh.
But the state, in trying to stay ahead of some of this stuff, has, just this last year, with the lovely legislature, said that we have to have an airport overlay zone, adopted and everything, so.
But we do, right? We have one.
Right, but we need to further define it, we need to tie it in better. We do have one, yes. We need to make sure it's compliant with the new code is what I'm getting at.
Our airport's ridiculously close to town in the first place.
So would we get a recommendation from the airport board on something like that?
What's that? Yeah, so what we'll do is, we will have to identify a funding source.
Oh, okay.
and then we'll hire, most likely, our consultant, Lochner Group, that helps us with all of our airport work. And they'll help us work with something, and then we'll interact with this body and get it figured out and tied in.
Okay. All right, that answers that question, and then, so our code 1530.060C. And this is in R1. Minimum building size for any one family dwelling is 1,000 square foot.
And I believe this is the only place where it says this.
I think you're right.
We talk about this with the tiny homes and what's the smallest house that you can build. It only talks about it in R1.
Well, yeah, maybe R1A. Well, agricultural, it would apply in ag, because ag is R1.
Yeah.
So anyway, my question is this applicable to ADUs, or do we need to,
I think it absolutely needs to be looked at.
So when you say it needs to be looked at, I assume you're meaning the piece of code that exists as opposed to the...
Yep.
Because if it's
I'm saying we either say ADUs have to be at least 1,000, or we
1530,
modify this
30, not 32, I think.
in an R1 zone.
R1, right?
Outside of R1, you could do it smaller.
Well, this one is, it's R2.
But it doesn't,
The size of the building, the ground floor.
1530...
No, you're in R1.
We're in R1.
yeah, but she's in R2.
No, she's in R1.
We are looking
She
at
selected the check mark,
Oh, I'm
But-
sorry,
In R1, okay.
sorry.
but you're still 1530.060.
The blue check was throwing
The
me.
blue check threw us, yep.
Sorry, I'll uncheck it.
That's the only, it may say it in R1A, but it seems to me like it only says it in R1.
Well, I will check all of those, but what I'm hearing is you're saying we need to fix that?
I do. I've thought that for a while.
Do we have any thoughts, recommendations? Because that's a big ask. I mean, in my opinion, we're...
It's a big ask to modify it, or it's a big ask to say it has to be?
Modify it's pretty straightforward, but
Right.
the big ask
The
is,
square footage.
what do you want it to be?
Right.
We're back to the minimum.
You're back to a tiny home conversation.
Yeah,
Zero. Yes.
I don't have any problem with reducing it from 1,000.
well, I
think
don't
quite
either.
often an ADU is a small building,
Right.
quite
I
often.
would say 400.
Typically, I would
Yeah.
think.
I read an interesting article online today that, as you would guess, might be related to code, and it talked about minimum home sizes and so on. And these minimum home sizes date back to the 50s and 60s, and every once in a while, every 10 years or so, they may get upgraded or changed based on what the local, well, I shouldn't say local, what the fads are at the time, what the political climate is, which is kind of what we're going through now.
The economy.
I'm open for suggestion, because what I believe is it's very subjective. I don't believe there's rhyme nor reason to it,
I would,
until you get too small.
I would say not less than 400, because less than 400, 399 and under is tiny homes. So
Okay.
I would say above that.
So I'm not gonna disagree with that, but let me talk about where that takes us in our code. So in the, is that off of our agenda this time? I guess it is. So the R3 rezone that I thought was on our agenda, evidently
Next week.
got deleted or taken off, or did I not put it on?
No, it's
Hmm?
not, the public hearing is for next.
Okay, all right, so we're coming up on a public hearing.
But I have
So
the
when-
information if you wanted me to pull that up.
Well, maybe not yet, listen to where I go. So likely that development will become a planned unit development, or what we call a PUD. When we get into the PUD, the zoning of the property impacts the density that we can adopt. So that said, the density that's portrayed on the document that they sent us is fat by, well, let me take that back. According to our density codes, it's low. The density could be actually higher. Then other factors come into play. But as we look at that, the other thing that comes into play is the minimum square footage. So if we go look at an R2 zone and an R3 zone, and it talks about the minimum square footage of a dwelling. So one of them is like 750 square feet, and the other one is 850 square feet. I'm not sure what the size, the proposed size of those dwellings is, but if there, I tried to look online and I noticed that one of their models was like 640 square feet. It wouldn't be allowed. And so anyway, to tie that back into what we're talking about here, is when we start talking about decreasing the minimum size of a dwelling, we're going to also have to go in and look at our PUD code and make sure that it aligns appropriately. Because if we take our 1,000 square foot minimum size down to something like 400 square foot, presumably now you can build a development with homes that are 500 square feet. And anyway, there could be issues with that. That's a lot of
issues as in too much density or too...
A lot of density, whether it's too much or not, is subjective, right? Somebody thinks that's just great, somebody else thinks, man.
Or I was thinking then there would be more yard space in between each unit, but yeah.
You still have a minimum lot size,
Right.
correct?
Yes, we have minimum lot sizes, and those are addressed. We could go to PUDs if we can find that. I looked at it today, planned unit developments. Might search.
No, it's right.
Planning Commission.
Can I pass it?
I always have trouble finding that.
You know what it is
Is it in 14?
Am I...
Can you expand Title 14, Judy? Planning, I don't see it. Oh, there it is, okay. Thank you.
I'm not sure where you want me to go, just stay here.
The other thing that's not addressed on the concept plan is any open space. I think it's probably a little bit down farther on the page. There we go. So if you look at D, the number of dwelling units per acre shall not exceed 5 per acre in the R1 zone, with a minimum livable floor space of 1,000 square feet per unit. 7 dwelling units per acre in the R2 zone, 850 square feet size. 9 dwelling units per acre in the R3 zone, 750 square feet, and so on, in the agricultural zone. So once we decide we're going to start changing these minimum sizes, we're going to have to comb through our code to make sure it's consistent. And then I can imagine the discussion we'll have trying to figure out item D.
This thing for next week is, or next time is in R3?
I think, yes. Anyway, I'm gonna move on from that because I think it's bigger than what we can chomp through, especially tonight. But Dan's request is noted. be thinking about that, and it's really something to work through. Do whatever you do for research to figure things out. Get into some of that, and let's come back with some recommendations as to what's, a realistic minimum size for a home on a, most of our lots are quarter-acre lots.
Just food for thought. Enix's approach to this, they gave a minimum length in one dimension. How about that?
Minimum length of a...
Whether you wanna call it a length or a width, they didn't
Like
specify
30 or-
square footage, they specified a lineal footage.
Oh,
And they said nothing shall be, I can't remember how they worded it, but it was like 20 feet in any one dimension. It shall not be less than that, or something like that, but basically it could be 10 feet deep by 30 feet, and it would've, but they didn't say square footage, they gave I don't know what the heck they were thinking, but just food for thought. There's multiple ways to skin this cat.
so it's kinda like the IRC. The IRC says minimum of 70 square feet, but they also have some stuff about nothing less than 7 foot.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, thank you. Yeah, so our 1528.060 in C, which is the R1A zone, talks about minimum dwelling size in accordance with the IBC, which is why I researched what does the IBC say for that.
It says IBC or IRC?
IBC, but IBC
Relies on,
points to
yeah,
IRC.
yeah.
And I think that's a problem. And should we allow EADUs in the agricultural zone?
No, I don't see,
Ag typically pushes us to R1, so we would just move to R1 and go, yeah. So what are our thoughts when a group of buildings, so we had this example earlier tonight, a group of buildings exceeds the 25% rule? And somebody comes in and wants an EADU. We're gonna give them a conditional use permit so they can add an EADU?
No, it's a lot more substantial than the gazebo.
Okay.
mhm.
Any other thoughts?
I would say you're playing with, you're already playing with fire a little bit as far as complaining neighbors. So I would say you look real hard before giving a conditional use permit on this one. Let's say you pick any random R1 subdivision and people start putting ADUs. You know what I'm saying? And if you allow it, that's fine, but if you really let them go crazy with what they're doing, you're gonna see a lot of complaints coming in.
That's why I keep that number handy, 1-800 Danza.
That gets you to, never mind.
Okay, that's all I have. Any other comments on EADUs so I would just ask that, based on these questions and get the minutes or if you've written any of them down or you remember any of them, get into it and come back with recommendations and be prepared to discuss, what, where, why, how, and we'll move through this. I actually think we're making quite a bit of progress, so it's great. Thank you. And okay, next item is member reports. Dave, we'll start with you.
Okay, I just noticed, coming in tonight, that maybe everybody else has noticed that Falcon, I think they call them 400 North, is moving dirt and kinda grading down there just before you go under the underpass on that Gap Road.
Yeah, they got an early grading permit, and now they have, the only thing we were waiting for on their building permit was a transfer of water. And I just barely got, I signed it last week, because I have to sign it when they transfer us water, and I have now the recorded change application that was signed, and they'll be moving forward with their building permit, so.
Oh, great.
Okay.
So you're saying you got the water?
Got the water, yep.
Okay, great.
The water isn't official until the transfer is complete, but we allow them to move forward with their building permit as long as they assume the risk of, if the water doesn't get transferred, they don't get their C of O. And they're willing to, they're comfortable with that risk, but they're giving us good water. In fact, the water rights that they're deeding us have been, part of those water rights have already been deeded to the city in a different transaction, unrelated to them completely, so.
Yeah, okay. Dave, anything else?
Yes, I just wanna make comments, not on the agenda, so we can't go in the weeds too much, but as everybody knows that, or should know, that the council approved a petition for annexation from, Alex Meisner at last city council meeting, and I was opposed on the grounds that, like we discussed tonight, I didn't feel it was a complete application. There was individuals that were brought in on that annexation parcels, the property owners, that were not in agreement. I've had some of them contact me, and this was since the meeting. But also, I just felt that Alex Meisner should have been there himself, representing it, as well as more information given. And, 'cause I think the people left not knowing any more than when they came. So, I just would have asked the council to slow down, not that it would have been stopped, but I just, felt that, I just felt that it was hurried, and it was, the application was given incomplete, and it was just a hurried process showing that I hope that isn't what is gonna be represented as far as what we can expect in the future. 'Cause this is very significant, and I think there was a lot of issues that needed to be, contemplated, because, this is gonna be a long process, but it is the first step in the annexation process, which we've just discussed. So, I, just want to make that report.
Thank you, Dave. Troy?
I have nothing to report.
Okay. Jerry?
Nothing for me.
Heather?
Well, this might surprise you, Dave Burton. I agree with you. I watched City Council, and I had the same feeling of rushness, like, why did it have to be put on that agenda for that night? It wouldn't have hurt for it to wait 2 weeks, so.
Exactly.
Actually, it would have, the reason being,
Who would it have hurt?
it would have been automatically approved. 'Cause the city had a timeline, once they submit I actually recommended to them that they hold off until they had more signatures, but technically they were within the legal bounds to submit the petition as it was, and the city has, it says in code, we have to within 10 days or the next scheduled city council meeting to respond. If we don't respond, the petition is automatically accepted and the process starts. So that my point being, I said it'd be better, this doesn't look good, it'd be better if you waited, and they said, okay, well, we think we'll move forward with it because we can, and they did.
But they had the option not to hurry.
To Dave's point, it feels rushed, and does that set a tone? And that was the deal.
So if they would have not submitted it, it wouldn't have been under that timeline until they submitted it.
Right.
Okay.
And I gave them that. I said, I would recommend you slow it down a little bit, and get more signatures. You are over the threshold, but we needed to take some action, either to approve or deny, 'cause by taking no action, it gets automatically approved, based on the way it reads, so that.
Because they submitted.
Because they submitted. And once they submitted, we were now in process of doing something, so.
And in my point that night, I said, I felt it's incomplete because the signatures weren't there. He admitted that it was they did it hurriedly to make that meeting. And since, I have received calls from some individuals who were part of that annexation application.
So it was incomplete in that they didn't have some of the signatures. It was just legally, technically okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah, technically, but
is that how you wanna do business?
Yeah.
That's the point that I think you're making.
that was where I was that night, yes.
So, but I have nothing else, I just wanted to.
Thank you, Heather. Weston?
Nope.
Nothing. Dan?
No, sir.
All right, we have, Madam Mayor?
I just wanna let all of you know how much I appreciate you, your commitment, your preparedness, all that you put into this commission. Would not wanna do this without you, and I just wanted to publicly say thank you.
Well, thank you for that, we appreciate it.
I make a motion that we adjourn.
Larry, you were gonna?
Oh, sorry, Larry can report, I
got
forgot.
Nothing. Nope, I'm good. Do I have a second on the adjourn motion?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Poor Larry.
Hey, when you updated those, dates on, when our terms are up, was mine January of 2025 or the end of 2025?
Let me look, 'cause I don't remember. But I don't say everything into the microphone, so. I did.